months ago, I hadn't seen a bunch of Martin Scorsese films, but with the release of Killers of the Flower Moon, it was time to fix that. So I watched all 26 of his movies, I read 2 books analyzing each of his films, and I watched countless hours of Martin Scorsese interviews. So now it's time to stop and rank all 26 Martin Scorsese films from the worst to the best. In last place, New York, and this is a perfect example of how a filmmaker at the top of his game can still completely miss the mark, where he tries to combine this 40s, 50 big band musical genre with a toxic, self-destructive, unlikable Scorsese lead. In interviews, he talked about that's kind of exactly what he was going for, where he said, I wanted to make it in the style of the 40s films with all of their artifice and the idea of no reality. The sets would be completely fake, but the trick would be to approach the characters in the foreground like a documentary, combining the 2 techniques, which is an interesting idea. Take the superficial, artificial style of the 40s and combined it with Mean Streets and Taxi Driver, but it really, really doesn't work. The characters suck all of the fun out of the musical numbers, and the musical genre isn't a great context to provide these intricate, deep character studies that work so well in Mean Streets and Taxi Driver, so the 2 things simply don't go together. Our 2 lead characters don't make any sense as a couple. They don't grow and change enough for it to be a satisfying or compelling character arc. Our lead male character is one of the just most frustrating characters I've ever seen in a movie. But the thing that just pushes it to the bottom is it's just unbelievable runtime. And once you get past about the first 40 minutes, which is mildly engaging, but still the characters are irritating, then it just goes into repetitious scene after repetitious scene where the guy is so obtuse and frustrating, it alienates everyone. They get in a shouting match and then they make up, and this just keeps repeating, and it simply does not work. Real quick before I continue on with this list, remember to join me down below in the comments section. Share your ranking of the Scorsese films that you've seen, or at least let me know, what are your favorite Scorsese films and what are your least favorite Scorsese films? Number 25, The Last Temptation of Christ. Now, as a point of reference, I am a Christian, I'm a person of faith, and I perceive of my role as a critic, as a ranker, is to approach films from my perspective. And the only way I can approach a film like this is as a Christian. And thus, like many people of faith, many Christians, I have a lot of inherent issues with the subject matter and what this movie does as someone that is a believer in Jesus. I watched this movie and it felt like this very strange Martin Scorsese self-insert Jesus fan fiction, where instead of mankind being created in the image of God, we have Martin Scorsese making Jesus in his own image. Jesus is guilt-ridden, a doubt-ridden sinner who goes to sex shows where he sees Mary Magdalene and then begs for her forgiveness afterwards. He wants to rebel, he wants to kill people, but he's plagued by fear, and the only reason he doesn't kill people is because he's afraid. And Judas, where clearly Martin Scorsese resonates with very broken characters, very dark characters, and makes these unlikable people his protagonists and makes them compelling. And thus in our story, Jesus is very broken, but one of his guides and mentors is Judas, the person whose name is literally synonymous with traitor and betrayer. And that's the person that Scorsese wants to use as this person to guide Jesus to do the right thing, both in life as well as in the dream sequence. And these choices all feel like very much revelations about Martin Scorsese. As they're supposed to be, it is his art. He is using this story to explore his own doubt, his own feelings on faith and leaps of faith and acts of sacrifice. That's what he's doing with this. However, I just haven't, I can't be okay with Martin Scorsese using Jesus to do that. Next up, who's that knocking at my door? This is a tough one to rank amongst the others because it's a nearly 60-year-old, very low-budget film. It is his first film. He made it when he was 25, and it feels like a student film. It feels like a Scorsese demo reel. It demonstrates his potential. It has these creative flourishes, these camera transitions, these overlays of images that show this guy's got some talent. It has a bunch of these ideas that he would do a far greater job exploring in future films that are realized properly, but this is the demo reel. It's not fully realized. It doesn't fully come together. It just shows you that this guy, there might be something here. Now, when you know the backstory of this film, you start to realize why all of this is. It essentially started as a short student film about JR and his friends. And then it was converted into a feature-length film about a romance. So it wasn't designed to be the movie that it is. And then they played it at a film festival, and some distributors were like, yeah, we'll put your movie out, but we put out exploitation films, so we need you to add some sex and some nudity into the film. So we went back and shot like a dream sequence of naked ladies coming to hang out with JR. They cut it all together, and so you watch the movie, and you're literally seeing a film that is cobbled together from short film, trying to expand it, demands from exploitation distributors, and I'm ranking that as next to a film that cost $200 million and de-aged a 75-year-old Robert De Niro into a 25-year-old man. These are quite different. But, I mean, as for the movie itself, in a post-Me Too world, I get what he's going for and exploring, but I honestly don't get it at the same time. It's so far detached from a world and experience that I understand, so there's not much insight I get out from this film. It's just a film that shows the potential that Scorsese had early on. Number 23, Boxcar Bertha. And this one is interesting because it's a Martin Scorsese directed Roger Corman film. Roger Corman is the most famous or infamous B-movie producer of all time. And Martin Scorsese is one of the most acclaimed prestige directors of all time. So it's just such a fascinating film to exist that they actually did a film together. Corman hired Scorsese to make a Bonnie and Clyde rip-off exploitation film. He wanted violence, chases, and boobs. It was mandated that there had to be boobs every 10 or 15 minutes. Scorsese hoped that he could offer all the thrills and exploitation that Corman wanted, but also maybe add a little bit more meat to it. It's certainly a product of its time. It is absolutely a Roger Corman exploitation film. It is by no means a lost Scorsese classic, but it does manage to add some weight and entertainment, or some weight to a film designed purely for the entertainment value of sex and violence. The characters are designed to have a little bit more depth and conviction. They have loyalty, tenacity to them. So there's a little bit of something in there. I mean, I'm not looking to rewatch this film. The Cormanisms absolutely are wrapped in this thing. That's what this is. But Scorsese's able to do something with it. And as an action movie, I found it more entertaining than the films lower on this list. Number 22, Bringing Out the Dead. Now, I hadn't seen this movie prior to watching the films for the purposes of this video. And when I saw that there was a Martin Scorsese film starring Nicolas Cage from the screenwriter of Taxi Driver and Raging Bull, I was like, sign me up. This is going to be cool. It was not cool. I didn't get this film. I didn't connect with it. I didn't resonate with what was being explored. It's a movie about a paramedic who lives in this world of watching people die, watching people lose their loved ones. And there's a hopelessness that comes with that. And so you're just spending 2 hours with this man who's depressed, who has insomnia, and is starting to hallucinate, and he's just struggling in this world that he's put himself in. and you just stew in that for 2 hours. Sit there. 2 hours. It was nice to see Ving Rhames and several other actors pop up in the film. There's some moments. It does the job of making you sad and depressed. But I didn't leave the film feeling enriched or like I had a new perspective on any of this. It was just an experience of sitting in something I did not want to sit in. 21 Silence, the third of Scorsese's challenges of the faith or loss of faith exploration stories after Last Temptation of Christ and Kundun. And I suspect because my faith journey, my religious journey, and even my struggles with guilt and my own failures are just so different from Scorsese's that his films exploring something that in many ways is very close to me and my experience don't connect at all. In the case of the movie Silence, more importantly, I just found it pretty dull and boring, where it's almost 3 hours long and not that much happened. And it also felt so repetitious and kind of hitting these same beats about, well, Christians are being tortured in order to get someone else to renounce their faith again and again and again. And as a mechanism to explore doubt, crisis of faith, problem of evil, why is there evil in the world? Why is God allowing certain things to happen? I find like a story like this to be such a specific and extreme context that I don't derive anything meaningful from my own life or my own journey out of it. So, I mean, amazing performances, a few moments of like, okay. But in general, it just took too long to do too little and felt too detached from something where I felt I shouldn't feel so detached from something that should be personal to me. Real quick, a word about the sponsor for today's video, HelloFresh. With HelloFresh, you can get farm-fresh, pre-proportioned ingredients and seasonal recipes delivered right to your doorstep. HelloFresh does all the planning and shopping for you. Their ingredients arrive at your doorstep pre-proportioned and ready to cook, along with pictured step-by-step recipe cards. The instructions are simple enough that a new cook like me could still figure it out. My fall has been jam-packed. I have 3 kids at 3 different schools, plus extracurriculars. We don't have extra time. HelloFresh makes whipping up a home-cooked dinner actually doable with quick and easy options, including their 15-minute meals. That's less time than it takes to get delivery. All 5 of us, including all 3 kids, loved it, and the kids actually wanted more. That's huge! Go to HelloFresh.com/50SeanChandler and use code 50SeanChandler for 50% off plus free shipping. HelloFresh is America's #1 meal kit, and you can get your order for 50% off plus free shipping at HelloFresh.com/50SeanChandler and use code 50SeanChandler. Bringing us into the top 20, Kundun, the second of Scorsese's faith films and the final one to be discussed in this video. And a rare Scorsese film where it feels like the director of photography and the composer are the star, the main creative force that I feel watching it, rather than Scorsese. It's such a different film than so much of everything else that he does that dwells in a world of deeply broken people. Even when he tackled Jesus is designed to be deeply broken and flawed, and here we're looking at a Dalai Lama that isn't treated that way. He has the struggles of faith, but it's more the burden of responsibility of everything that he's doing. But he's presented as a very strong character that's set and consistent throughout it. And that's a little bit of why I don't think I really resonated with it. It's just this Dalai Lama's the fountain of wisdom and knowledge that shares truths, but there's not really growth in an arc there. And on a story level, there's a destination at the end, quite literally a destination at the end, but it feels like a series of events in chronological order, but not a clear story from beginning to end. By the inherent nature of the Dalai Lama, not this super flashy, compelling, charismatic figure. He's the wise mentor. The score is so powerful. The images are so beautiful. The Dalai Lama is interesting in theory. The movie itself, I think, needed a little bit more oomph and plot. Next up, After Hours, Martin Scorsese's 80s comedy. And at the end of the day, a comedy's job is to make you laugh. And this one didn't really make me laugh often enough. Perhaps it's because comedy is subjective. Perhaps it's because I watched it the first time a couple months back, didn't know what I was going into. Perhaps it's because comedy is timely. It's a nearly 40-year-old film. Perhaps it's because it's so New York-centric. And I'm in Central Texas. I've spent one day in New York City in my entire life that maybe I missed some of the cultural context that informs so much of the comedy of the film. But for me, it didn't really resonate with me on any particular level. I didn't find it that funny, and I didn't connect with the character in any sort of exploration in it. Now, as it moved into the back half, and all of these seemingly random incidents start to intertwine, and it gets kind of weirder and more insane, and the logic of it starts to play like a dream, I started to like that a little bit more. I was like, okay, here we go. This is getting interesting to me. But I think even part of maybe where there's a disconnect on this film for me is there wasn't a full, clear vision for what they were trying to accomplish at the end of it. When they were originally filming it, they didn't have an ending they were happy with. So at one point in time, the plan was in the final 10 minutes that our lead guy was going to climb between the legs of the lady in the basement and climb back into her womb and be birthed in the middle of a street, as if Ari Aster time traveled from 2023 to direct the final 10 minutes of this film or something like that. It's going to go full surrealist out of the blue. And then they kind of had a different, shifted around to all of a sudden he's in a statue and he's being driven off by Cheech and Chong with no resolution. And then it kind of ended with him returning to work. But that's kind of the problem. When you have this journey and you don't really know where you're going with it, it's tough to feel like there was meaning in any of it at the same time. 18, The Age of Innocence, a true Scorsese romance in that it's not really a romance at all. By the end of it, it's another exploration of a broken man longing for a woman that he can't have as he struggles with all of his many inner desires. So it's kind of fascinating as it takes some of these ideas that are all throughout Scorsese's work, and in particular, these stories where you have a man drawn to two different women, and he takes that concept not to the mean streets, not gangsters, not crazy unhinged men, but tells it in this very prim and proper sophisticated society. And explores the same themes, the same type of inner struggle, but wildly different movie. Unfortunately, in the case of this movie, this time period, these types of movies are some of my least favorite kinds of movies. It's just like a genre I don't connect with it. Little Women, Jane Austen, that sort of stuff. This context, prim and proper, 150, 200 years ago, lots of discussions about marriage and upper class. I don't get it. I don't resonate with it. So just on a superficial level, it's not a type of story that's my thing. And then I think a big part of the problem here is that we have just such a non-committal protagonist, a non-committal lead character. While it has an immaculate production, it's tight, well-structured, it's not really my kind of film at all. And then the lead character, I think, needed a little bit more work to push it higher on the list. Then we have Alice Doesn't Live Here. Then we have Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. Another Scorsese romance of sorts. This one being about a woman whose husband dies and she has to try and find herself, support her family, find a way to kind of pursue her dreams again, all while trying to find someone else to be in her life. And it's very much about her finding herself, but there's also very much her trying to find love in her life while encountering quite a few broken Scorsese-type male characters along the way. It's a movie that, for me, didn't necessarily do anything particularly wrong as to why it's a little bit lower on the list. It just didn't do anything that I specifically resonated with either. I suspect some of that is the simple fact that some of the importance, some of the insight of what's going on in the film, 50 years removed, it doesn't play quite the same as it did before, as society has changed the way that women are perceived, mothers, whether in the workforce, in their relationships. And so it kind of plays differently 50 years removed from its original context. So some of that gets lost a little bit. So, and it's it. Like I said, I don't think it necessarily did anything wrong. It's just not a movie that I got a whole lot out of, but it was like, this is well done. I can see why other people would really enjoy this, and why when it came out, it probably hit much harder and resonated with people a lot. Number 16, Gangs of New York. And as I was watching this movie, I feel like I had a very common experience I had with a number of other movies on this list that are higher up on the list. But I feel like there's a common experience where the first half of these movies with these epic run times, I feel like I want the movie to kick into gear, kick into plot mode sooner than Scorsese wants to kick into plot mode. Scorsese likes to explore these communities and these worlds and these atmospheres and have these lively characters. And so a big chunk of his films is just us experiencing their life. And I want to get quicker to the plot. He wants to spend more time with the people.
I just found that over the years, films that I saw repeatedly held up longer, not because of plot, but because of character. For the rest of it, I know the plot and it's not interesting anymore.
But like when it comes to this movie, there's so many great, lively characters. Of course, Bill the Butcher being probably the most famous character from this film. Long before I'd ever seen the movie, I was well aware of Bill the Butcher, and just even the imagery of Daniel Day-Lewis in the part just stands out. It makes a mark.
I killed the last honorable man 15 years ago. Since then...
It has its moments of the payoff of this revenge story, and it does kind of take you to a time and a place. The movie's designed in a very complicated way, where the whole story is set up to be a revenge story. And the whole movie crescendos to the final showdown, and then it's overshadowed by everything else taking place around them in the city. So we even kind of skip over the final duel. And I get it. I mean, the line in the movie even kind of makes the point of like, well, it doesn't really matter which side they're on anymore now, does it? All builds up to make the point of like, all of this is more important than our squabbling, our rivalry, the revenge. I understand the message you're communicating, but it also makes it feel a little bit like you just wasted 2.5 hours of my life building up the revenge story when all this other stuff, this other context was more important. Then we have Cape Fear, one of Scorsese's more conventional genre films, where it's a remake of a classic thriller, and it delivers the experience promised by the genre. You get a little bit of that interesting Scorsese work and how he just likes to have these broken characters, but also have evil characters have some good inside of them or this other perspective on them. So our evil villain is a victim and our hero is a sinner with a lot of personal issues. And so much of what happens to people in the story they don't deserve, but they did bring it on themselves. They did do something to cause them to head down this path and have these things happen to them. I mean, it's an effective genre film. It absolutely does its job. And of Scorsese's films, it's one of the more consumable movies because it is just like a conventional thriller about this guy's family being tormented. But I think also for that same reason, it's kind of less interesting than most of his movies, where since it is more straightforward, it feels more like this is a movie that someone else could have made. And in fact, it's a film that Spielberg was originally going to make this film. And when you watch it, you go, well, this feels awfully dark for a Spielberg movie. but it also feels awfully mainstream for a Scorsese film. Apparently, in Spielberg's version, the family would have been happier, and the seduction scene between the daughter and Max would have been a chase instead. Makes sense. That feels like differences between these two different directors, but like a good movie, a solid thriller, an enjoyable film, just pretty safe for Scorsese. Number 14, The Color of Money, a bit of an oddity in Scorsese's filmography because it's a sequel to a 1961 film. Not a lot of sequels in Scorsese's filmography. Likewise, it stars a young Tom Cruise playing against an aging Paul Newman. So just several kind of dynamics in here that just make it stand out. While at the same time, the movie itself, solid, good. Another one of those kind of more conventional films on the list. It is an interesting look at this aging legend trying to pass the baton, but also wondering if he still has it. He's looking to feel alive again. And at first he's trying to do that vicariously through this other person, but he's so drawn to this world that he has to know do I still have what it takes, and is willing to face humiliation after humiliation, somewhat in the process of reigniting that fire inside of him. It's a little bit tough to root for any of these characters when they're all so abrasive and inherently trying to take advantage and hustle one another. But that's also kind of what makes some of these final bouts interesting, is that you have such layered and complex feelings as to the outcome of who wins and loses and why. All of that culminating in the bout between our two lead characters. And just in case you haven't seen it, I don't want to go into it too much, but it has so many layers and you feel so many different emotions over the final victor of the match, and then what you learn afterwards, how it plays out, that perfectly encapsulates the journey that they've been on. It feels just right. And you have a scenario where Eddie views Vincent as a great talent, and thus he's the one that he has to defeat to prove to himself that he's still got it. Number 13, Casino. And I think that this is the most flawed of Scorsese's gangster epics. Now, don't get me wrong. I think this movie is very good. When it's good, it's great. It has moments just as powerful as the great moments in Goodfellas. And the movie is in many ways a spiritual sequel and follow-up to Goodfellas. But I think with this film, there is a little bit too much information, too many plot points, too many characters, that it didn't come together quite as tightly. He tried to include too many of the real life events into this film. In Scorsese on Scorsese, he discusses how it was difficult trying to tackle this complex, convoluted web of characters, plot lines, and pull it together into a cohesive whole. And essentially the movie was radically reworked in editing. The voiceover that's very heavy in the first 30 minutes was supposed to play out over 2 hours of the movie, but in the editing room, they realized that they were giving away too little information early on, and by the time they gave the information, it was too little too late. So they reworked it, so the first 30 minutes of this movie is so exposition, voiceover heavy, and it just feels like they're information dumping for too long. The character work here is much better than, say, the story work. And you're watching the tragic downfall of De Niro's character as these little flaws that he has in who he's drawn to, who he enables, who he's friends with, and those things he can't resist that cause him so much trouble and ultimately lead to the crumbling of this gigantic empire. You watch it and you go, how much is this really real? And you start diving into the real life events, and it makes the movie better. Some of the murders in this film occurred only 10, 15 years before the film came out. Like, it's addressing, at the time the movie came out, the recent history of Las Vegas. 12, Shutter Island. I was late to the party on this one. Another first-time watch for this ranking, but somehow the movie wasn't spoiled for me in advance, which I greatly appreciated. Much like Cape Fear, this feels like a more conventional genre film than Scorsese normally does. It feels pretty separate and detached from a lot of his usual work, but he's a great director working with a great cast with a fun, interesting genre. So you have kind of this trippy and intriguing mystery filled with twists and turns, missing people, and a film where nothing is as it initially seems. There's just a series of twists all the way up until the end of it that just keep you guessing and keeps reworking everything that you've seen up to that point in time. It's also a film that kind of demands a second viewing, which I haven't been able to give it yet, but it's the sort of film you get to the end of it and you're like, oh, now that I know all of this, let me rewatch this to figure out how all the pieces fit together and when was this teased and how did it all come together. And unfortunately, I haven't been able to do that one yet. Now, I will say, despite the ending not being spoiled for me, it did feel pretty predictable by the time that I watched the film. So it wasn't as impactful like a wow finale as maybe it was for people back when the film initially came out, but still like a solid genre film. Scorsese knows what he's doing and delivered with this one. Number 11, Mean Streets. And this feels like the movie where Scorsese finally found his sweet spot. It takes ideas and themes that were being explored in Who's That Knocking on My Door, and it does them properly. If that was the demo tape, this is the actual studio version of it where he got it right. And so much of it feels personal because it was. He was drawing from his own experiences growing up in a community. And he's even shared stories of even incidents in this film come from moments where he barely survived being in a shootout.
I was with these people in this car. I told my friend was with me in the back seat. And I said, oh, it's 2 o'clock in the morning. This is nonsense. Let's go home. He said, yeah, okay, let's go home. The car drove off and they got shot. Mean Streets comes out of that violence, which I missed by chance, really.
Where he might have died had he not gotten out of a car. He talks about how so many of the ideas in this, the characters in it, they're him. Like this is what he lived and what he experienced, and the story is his way of processing through all of that. And it just gives it this reality. It grounds it. It makes everything feel true. Whether it's that documentary style of just feeling like you're in the room with these people interacting, while having something to say and exploring how these communities, these environments produced these very toxic, broken people, where they still are loyal. They still care about people. But at the same time, they're just stuck in a toxic world with all sorts of crazy ideas that trap people there. And it so often has dire, dire consequences with where this path leads. And this becomes the template of so much of his future work. And the same themes, ideas, context, style of filming, and he figured it out with his third film. Real quick before we dive into the top 10, a huge percentage of Martin Scorsese's films are based off of books, and you can get a free audio book of your choice by signing up for a free trial of Audible at audibletrial.com/Sean Chandler. If you're like me and you like to read with your ears, not your eyes, Audible is a great option. I have been a massive fan of Audible since August of 2015, and so many of Scorsese's films are based off of books, and there's only so much that you can adapt into a film, even if it's a long 3.5 hour long film. So like with Killers of the Flower Moon, the book is told from a wildly different perspective. With Wolf of Wall Street, Scorsese's talked about how he had to cut some of the more wild and extreme things that Jordan Belfort did. And if you want to dive into one of those, you can get a free audiobook of your choice at audibletrial.com/Sean Chandler. Kicking off our top 10, Hugo. And with Martin Scorsese, there's certain types of movies that he's closely associated with. But one of the things that makes him so interesting is all throughout his career, he always kept doing new things. And one of the most surprising films in Scorsese's entire filmography is Hugo. Not just because it's a family film, which it's the only one on this list, and most of them are very not family friendly, but also because it's so innocent and sentimental. It's a movie that has a sweetness to it. It's a film that gets emotional in a way that you don't really get in Scorsese's other films, where there's this sense of, once again, still broken characters, but for wildly different reasons, with someone who lost their work and they felt it was meaningless and they've been forgotten. And so you have these moments that are satisfying, crowd-pleasing, emotional moments. Normally, the emotional release of a Scorsese film is more tragic, bittersweet, complicated. And here, he allows there to be just pure moments of joy, of realization. Another nice thing about this movie is how, as much as it has its fantastical cinematic elements to it, there's also is a history intertwined into this. So as we were watching it, or after we watched it, we did like this deep dive into the real life characters that are being explored in it and the history. And it's able to kind of tell some of these fascinating little anecdotes from early cinema in a context where it is a entertaining family film, but you're learning film history and there's an emotion to it. And when you can have multiple layers and do all of it at the same time, that's when you have something special. Number 9, The Irishman. And decades later, Scorsese returns to the underground gangster crime genre, tells another epic, and in the case of this movie, tells a story in a manner that really wouldn't have been possible at any time in the past, where he uses the best of 2019 de-aging to take these men in their late 70s and de-age them all throughout the different decades. And is it fully effective? No. Can you de-age the way that 75-year-old Robert De Niro moves? No, you cannot. There's some faults in what they're trying to do, but at the same time, they're able to tell a story that you could not have told previously in this sort of fashion. And you can kind of see the culmination of everything that Scorsese's been doing with this film. As by the time he makes this particular epic, it has the elements of all the previous Goodfellas, Casino. It's a different type of story because Martin Scorsese was a different man when he made this one. He's no longer in his 40s or his 50s. He's making this in his late 70s. And so the end of our film isn't about the death of the character or ending with the person going to retirement. It's sitting with a man reflecting on his past. The sort of emotion and truth that it's tough to explore that when you're too young to understand it fully. I think being on streaming allows it to be longer because of the comfort at home, because you can pause, because you can pick up the next day. But still, I think in the first hour, there's just so much going on that you can't lock in on what exactly matters. So I think you could have tightened up the first hour, the back hour. All that to say, it's still just a really powerful film, compelling story, and a gangster film that he could not have told in this way for technological reasons, but also because I think he just needed to be a specific age to be able to understand the final 30 minutes of the film. Next up, The Aviator, one of the greatest directors of all time, teams up with one of the best actors of our time to tell the story of one of the most interesting men of the last 200 years. Howard Hughes is an example of a life where reality is stranger than fiction. Like, I knew a little bit about him, but the whole time we were watching this movie, my wife and I kept looking at each other being like, did that really happen? And then we'd look it up. And yeah, Each and every time, whatever it was, it really happened. He was a groundbreaking aviator, a groundbreaking filmmaker. He dated multiple very famous actresses. He survived multiple life-threatening plane crashes. He battled the government, and he both lived as a wild public celebrity and became kind of a crazy recluse. All of that. One life. And any two of those things would make for an interesting story, but he did all of that. This is wild. And like I said, it's being told by top talent with plenty of budget to be able to pull whatever they want off. I would say this is a movie that feels like it could have been directed by someone else. It doesn't have quite as much of Scorsese's fingerprint on the whole thing. It's another one where I would say the better version of this film probably would have been 10, 15 minutes shorter, just tightening it up. All of that said, it's great, it's fascinating, it's engaging, it's a very interesting story. Next, Killers of the Flower Moon. Martin Scorsese has made an awful lot of films exploring criminal underworlds, the depravity of man, the depths that people will go for greed, the lust for power. And here he finds a very different type of story to explore those exact same ideas. And what I think makes this movie so interesting is that it's based off real life events from such an interesting point in history with fascinating power dynamics where the Osage people were incredibly wealthy and thus had power. But they didn't control the government, police, hospitals, banking system, and thus in that sense, they were powerless and vulnerable to being taken advantage of. And you just have this story about these people coming in, looking to try and take their wealth. And it makes for this story that's so gut-wrenching. As about 30 minutes into it, you realize what's going on, everyone that's involved, and you just feel sick to your stomach and helpless and hopeless, waiting for someone to do the right thing. And it's just a compelling story. I think it probably is a little bit too long. In particular, in the first 90 minutes, it could have been tightened up. I feel like it's more compelling as it goes along. I think there's a little bit of trickiness in the way they decided to tell the story.
But this story is being told, this history is being told almost from the perspective of Ernest Burkhart. And they kind of give him this conscience and they kind of depict that there's love. But when somebody conspires to murder your entire family, that's not love.
That sacrificed the mystery and intrigue of being this investigation, but without, I feel, going deep enough into the characters and helping me understand them well enough.
Then I said, oh yeah, the story really is the relationship of Ernest and Molly and the betrayal. The only problem is we don't know anything about Ernest. Everybody else have got tons of material on. We don't know anything about him.
But still a compelling, fantastic film that drew me into this world and made me fascinated by just the depth of depravity on display. Number 6, King of Comedy. King of Comedy is a painful watch because in virtually every single scene, our lead character is rejected. And on most occasions, he should be rejected. He is totally out of line. He's not listening. But like there's this naivety and innocence that makes you feel bad for him. You don't want him to be hurt. You don't want him to be punished. You want him to listen. You want him to learn. And he doesn't. And he goes to more and more and more extremes to get what he wants. And so much of that, and in the case of King of Comedy, it's terrifying because our lead character would rather be constantly rejected and kidnap a person than listen. Reading on kind of the backstory and all of this one, Scorsese was going through a divorce at the time it came out. He was just far enough into success that it was starting to take a toll on him. He was feeling very lonely. And it said in interviews, he really resonated with both of our lead characters in the film. That he remembered being this desperate, hungry young filmmaker doing anything devoid of shame to get a foot in the door. And then as he was making the film, he resonates with our other lead character as this celebrity who's seasoned and worn out by the fame and the demands of all of it. And you feel that. It's like this, so much personality to it. Now, of the movies high on this list, this might be the least flashy of the bunch, but of kind of maybe a smaller character pieces, I think this is the one that I was like, I really dig what this is. 5, Ragin Bull, the anti-Rocky boxing movie. There's 2 extraordinarily famous boxing movies out there. You've got Rocky, which of course was a franchise, and Ragin Bull. Both of them highly celebrated, both of them incredibly memorable, but on polar opposite ends of the spectrum, where Rocky is designed to be this uplifting underdog story with a central character that is incredibly easy to root for. And on the other side, you have Ragin Bull, this character study about a deeply unlikable person that you're not rooting for, but is compelling in his own way. He's just such a toxic person that won't learn and grow, won't do the right thing, and you're watching his jealousy, his rage unfold, and how much it just wreaks havoc on his life. These choices that he made, destroying everything. In many different ways, Scorsese talks about how he intentionally designed the dramatic scenes to feel like documentary. Cameras in the room just watching 2 people live their life. But when it comes to the boxing sequences, it almost feels like a dream.
The rest of the film, anything else, was concentrated in almost meditative state in terms of framing. But the boxing scenes would be like you're on another planet.
The boxing sequences are intentionally designed to be these metaphors for all of the ways that he's beating himself up because of his self-hate. He knows that he's a terrible person. He knows that he's bad and therefore deserves a beating because of it. And thus, he treats these boxing sequences like the metaphors that they are. And they were so committed to making it true that you have De Niro gaining 60 pounds, not wearing a fat suit, gaining the weight to be able to portray this and feel the experience of going from one body to the other in a small window of time and playing out the truth of that makes it just this powerful character study that is one of the timeless classics. Number 4, Goodfellas, Martin Scorsese's underground crime masterpiece. The movie that kind of took what he had done in previous films on a smaller scale, took these ideas that he'd sort of explored, and finally was able to turn them into this epic story. Much of that is that it is based off of a book and it's based off of real life events that just kind of give a certain truth to everything playing out. But with this film, he figured out a specific formula that he would use many times again in the future with other movies that tracks the rise and the fall of this underground world of crime. And he talks about in interviews how it's not really about a lead character. There is technically a lead.
There is no main character. And Ray Liotta, he's like Virgil taking Dante through the underworld. The real character in the movie is the underworld.
And we see how this world affects all these different people and how it rises and how it's the inherent flaws of a community, a world built with these types of relationships, this amount of toxicity, this amount of insanity, this amount of depravity is destined to fail and collapse. And there's so many just great little details in here with characters that are awful. Joe Pesci's character, he's awful.
You mean, so, let me understand this, because maybe it's me, I'm a little fucked up, maybe. But I'm funny how? I mean, funny like I'm a clown, I amuse you?
But he's so memorable because of his insanity, because people go along with everything that he's doing. And all along the way, you see the choices that they make. In the moments they could turn around, they could pause, they could let this be where they're going to be comfortable, but they keep going, they keep pushing, and because of it, it all comes crumbling down. And then you're just sucked in and you can't stop watching the train wreck that is the last hour. You're just like, what's going to happen? What are the police going to do? And you're not rooting for them to not get caught or not get killed in the big sense. But in the moment, you're like, uh-oh, oh no, oh no, is that what's happening? That makes sense. He deserved that. But those realizations are so potent and impactful. And he just has these you have a complex relationship with the characters, and therefore everything that happens has layers emotionally in you, the audience member. Real quick before I give you my top 3, be sure to join me down below in the comment section. If you've seen all of his movies, let me see your ranking. However, there's a lot. So otherwise, just let me know your top Scorsese films and what are your least favorite Scorsese films. Likewise, if you enjoyed this video, I've done a ton of other rankings just like this. David Fincher, Christopher Nolan. Earlier this year, I did all of the Spielberg films, another epic one just like this. But if you enjoy these types of director rankings, there's almost certainly another one in there that you'll enjoy. Number 3, The Wolf of Wall Street. Now, what I love about this one is that Scorsese applies the same formula that he used for Casino, for Goodfellas, and then later Irishman, this rise and fall story, but applies it to a very different type of criminal.
The style I felt originally was more like Goodfellas. I had done it. What more could I bring to it? And we found a way, and that was ultimately through his character.
And because the white-collar criminal is just a little bit more accepted, it takes us on this wild roller coaster ride where we're drawn to the charisma, the audacity of Jordan Belfort. We're along for the ride and completely ignoring the fact that he is a criminal taking advantage of people. He's awful. And that's almost the interesting dynamic that this movie has with its audience, as well as trying to even almost explain why so many different coworkers were drawn to this person and were a part of all of these crimes. There's just something so magnetic about Jordan Belfort and all of the insanity that takes place that just draws you in. And it finds a way to be so wildly entertaining, so irreverent towards so much, sometimes violence, death, people being taken advantage of, and it just goes for it. But also, has this tragic fall as you see how someone can be so drawn by greed, but being unable to stop at any level. They just keep going and getting more and more excessive in everything that they're doing. And in the 21st century, these type of criminals are the fascinating ones that made the headlines. These people on Wall Street that were wolves. Taxi Driver, a movie that's nearly 50 years old, but which is just as relevant today to pretty much all of society as it was in the 70s in the cultural context of New York City.
Ultimately, what stayed with us was the psychological and emotional state of that character. As we know now, tragically, it's a norm. Every other person is like Travis Bickle now.
The whole movie is a study of this disenfranchised man who's not able to connect with anyone in a normal and healthy way. Martin Scorsese has repeatedly said that for him, the whole movie kind of hinges on this one scene where he's being rejected on a phone call. And the camera just kind of pans away.
I felt that when he made that phone call, it was so painful. We shouldn't witness it. So the camera should track away, but not pan away. It should move completely to a hallway.
And you can't even watch the rejection because it's too painful. And he's this man that's searching for meaning, purpose, significance, just like everyone else. But his inability to connect in a healthy manner with anyone keeps pushing him to these violent extremes. And the way that he connects, it's all absolutely wrong.
The obsessiveness of Travis Bickle, the sense of being the outsider and not being the dispossessed. That's how, we felt that way.
The movie came out just a couple years after Death Wish. Both of them are set in New York City. Both of them involve someone being violent towards criminals in the finale. But in the case of Death Wish, it's about a healthy man who turns to violence because of violence and wrestles whether that's good or bad. Taxi Driver shows this clearly unhinged man.
But who the hell else are you talking? Talking to me? Well, I'm the only one here.
Attempt to assassinate a politician to save a campaign worker, and then is celebrated as a hero because he goes on this unhinged, violent killing spree in a brothel to free a prostitute. And there's just like all of these kind of layers to it of when it came out and how significant it was. And at the same time, it's so profound today as you continue to see people that are disenfranchised, seeking purpose and meaning, in looking in all the wrong places. But coming in at number 1, The Departed. With this film, you have Scorsese returning to a genre that he's explored many times before, but this is a very different type of gangster film. It's a much tighter time frame. It's this very taut cat and mouse exploration. It is a plot-driven film. There are compelling, captivating characters, but it's much more about a series of events, twists and turns. In that regard, it's probably more mainstream and accessible, and that's probably also exactly why this is a movie that's just a lot more on my wavelength. It's designed for the way that I like to connect with these types of stories. While being very plot-based, you still get these great characters in there, in particular from Jack Nicholson, who I've realized, like, I haven't watched a lot of his movies recently, and he's just so effortlessly good in this movie, and quirky and weird with these details where he's holding up a hand.
But the character of Costello was still presented as your generic big shot gangster. We went off on a whirlwind of the fact that Costello would be losing control and, in a sense, losing his mind, really.
He's so unhinged, but so believable at the same time. You have this story that it keeps you on the edge of your seat and guessing how they're going to get out of this mess. And at the same time, it feels smarter than me. When you get to the final moments with the twists and turns, you have one of the most shocking finales that comes out of nowhere, but also feels like, yeah, that makes sense. That feels like the culmination of what this character's journey has been up to this point in time. You've earned this shocking finale, and you came up with something smarter than what I would have come up with. And that, to me, is when a movie works, it resonates, and you've done something special. The characters are great, the performances are great, keeps me on the edge of my seat, it's compelling. For all those reasons, this is my personal favorite Scorsese film, so it comes in at number 1. If you enjoyed this video, I have got more director rankings just like this one right in that playlist: Spielberg, Scorsese, Fincher. Also, I've done several other Scorsese reviews giving deeper dives into some of these movies. You can check those out in that playlist over there. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies and TV.